sister Victoria's voice cut through the Easter morning air like a blade. Victoria, my sister, spoke, and her words sliced through the Easter morning atmosphere. I stood in my parents' foyer in Scottsdale, Arizona, smoothing down the vintage silk blouse I'd found at Goodwill 3 weeks earlier. Standing in my parents' entryway in Scottsdale, Arizona, I smoothed out the old silk top I had picked up from a thrift store a few weeks ago. God, Leah, you look like you raided a grandmother's closet again. Good grief, Leah, you look like you've been shopping in some old lady's wardrobe again. My name is Leah Simmons. I am Leah Simmons. I'm 32 years old and I've been called worse things than Thrift Store Girl by my own family. At 32, I've heard my family call me much worse things than a girl who shops at thrift stores. Standing there in their marble-floored entryway, surrounded by the smell of expensive lilies and the sound of clinking champagne glasses, I felt the familiar sting of their judgment settling over me like a heavy coat. Their judgment, a sensation I was all too familiar with, draped itself over me like a heavy cloak as I stood in their marble-floored hallway, surrounded by the scent of pricey lilies and the chime of champagne glasses. It's a beautiful blouse, I said quietly, running my fingers over the delicate fabric. I softly said, "It's a lovely blouse," as I stroked the fine material. What they didn't know was that this particular piece was actually vintage Chanel, worth more than Victoria's entire Easter outfit. They were unaware that the garment was, in fact, vintage Chanel, with a price tag exceeding my sister's whole holiday ensemble. But I'd learned long ago that explaining myself to them was pointless. However, I had learned a long time ago that trying to justify my choices to them was a futile effort. My mother appeared from the kitchen, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through their floor-to-ceiling windows. My mother emerged from the kitchen, her flawless blonde hair glistening in the sunlight pouring in through their huge windows. "Oh, Leah, sweetheart," she sighed, looking me up and down with that expression I knew so well. With a familiar look, a mix of pity and disappointment, my mother sighed and said, "Oh, Leah dear," while inspecting my outfit from head to toe. Disappointment mixed with pity. A look of pity and disappointment. "We've talked about this. This isn't the first time we've discussed this. Image matters, especially when we're having guests. How you present yourself is important, particularly when we have people over." "What guests?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would irritate me. I asked who was coming, even though I knew the answer would likely annoy me. "The Hendersons are coming for brunch," Victoria announced, adjusting her designer dress with obvious satisfaction. Victoria, with a smug air of self-satisfaction, adjusted her designer dress and announced, "The Hendersons are coming for brunch. You remember Jessica Henderson? She just got promoted to regional manager at the marketing firm, making 6 figures now. Do you remember Jessica Henderson? She just became the regional manager at her marketing company and is now earning a 6-figure salary." The comparison hung in the air like smoke. The implied comparison lingered in the air. At 34, Victoria worked as a real estate agent and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about her success. Victoria, 34, a real estate agent, never failed to let everyone know about her achievements. Even though I knew she struggled to make her mortgage payments most months, our parents, both retired teachers living on fixed incomes, had somehow convinced themselves that Victoria was the family success story, while I was the disappointment who couldn't even dress properly. Despite knowing that she often had difficulty with her mortgage, my parents, both retired teachers on limited incomes, had somehow concluded that Victoria was the family's greatest achievement, and I was the letdown who couldn't even dress appropriately. "Maybe you could borrow something from Victoria," my mother suggested, her voice hopeful. "Perhaps you could borrow something of Victoria's," my mother suggested with a note of hope. "You two are about the same size. The two of you are nearly the same size." I almost laughed. I nearly burst out laughing. Victoria was 3 inches taller and 2 sizes larger than me, but pointing that out would only make things worse. Victoria was a few inches taller and 2 sizes bigger than I was, but bringing that up would just cause more trouble. Instead, I forced a smile. I just forced a smile. "I'm comfortable in what I'm wearing. I feel fine in this outfit. Thanks. Thank you. Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. Victoria gave an exaggerated eye roll. Comfortable. That's so typical of you, Leah. Comfortable. That's exactly what I'd expect you to say, Leah. Some of us actually care about making a good impression. Some people actually care about how they're perceived. What they didn't understand was that I'd stopped caring about their impressions years ago. They didn't realize that I'd stopped caring about their opinions many years ago. What I cared about was the quiet satisfaction of building something they couldn't see, something they'd never thought to look for. Instead, I found quiet satisfaction in building something invisible to them, something they never even considered looking for. But standing there in their pristine house, watching them prepare for their performance of family perfection, I couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different somehow. Yet as I stood in their flawless home, watching them get ready for their show of family perfection, I couldn't shake the feeling that this day was going to be different. The pattern had been set for as long as I could remember. The dynamic had been established for as long as I could recall. Growing up, Victoria was the golden child who got the newest clothes, the biggest bedroom, and most of our parents' attention. As a child, Victoria was the favorite, receiving the latest clothes, the largest room, and the majority of our parents' focus. I was the quiet one who learned to make do with hand-me-downs and library books, who found treasures in places others overlooked. I, the quiet one, learned to be content with used clothes and library books, finding value in places others ignored. After college, while Victoria moved back home to launch her real estate career with our parents' financial support, I'd taken a different path. After graduation, while Victoria returned home to start her real estate career with our parents' money, I chose a different course. I rented a small apartment across town and started working as a financial analyst for Sunnindale Financial, one of the smaller investment firms in Phoenix. I leased a tiny apartment on the other side of town and began working as a financial analyst at Sunnindale Financial, one of the smaller investment companies in Phoenix. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was steady. The salary wasn't great, but it was reliable. And more importantly, it taught me things about money that most people never learned. More importantly, it taught me financial lessons that most people never get a chance to learn. Victoria had always viewed my thrift store shopping as evidence of my failure to launch properly into adulthood. Victoria had always seen my habit of shopping at thrift stores as proof that I had failed to properly transition into adulthood. It's embarrassing, she'd told me during my last birthday dinner 6 months ago. She had told me at my last birthday dinner 6 months ago. It's mortifying. You're 32, Leah. Leah, you're 32. Don't you think it's time to start shopping at real stores like an adult? Don't you think it's time to shop at normal stores like a grown-up? What she didn't know was that my thrift store habit had started as necessity, but evolved into something much more strategic. She didn't know that my thrifting, which began out of need, had become a much more strategic practice. While she spent her commissions on designer handbags and expensive dinners, I'd been quietly investing every extra dollar I could find. While she was using her earnings for designer bags and costly meals, I was quietly putting every spare dollar I had into investments. The vintage clothing, the second-hand furniture, the careful budgeting, it all served a larger purpose that none of them could see. The old clothes, the used furniture, and the careful budgeting were all part of a bigger plan that was invisible to them. My parents worried about me constantly, though they expressed it in ways that felt more like criticism than concern. My parents were always concerned about me, but their concern often came across as criticism. "We just want you to be happy, sweetheart," my mother would say during our monthly phone calls. My mother would say during our calls, "We just want you to be happy, honey. But you can't live like a college student forever. However, you can't keep living like you're still in college. When are you going to start building a real life? When will you begin to build a proper life for yourself?" The irony wasn't lost on me. I found the irony in her words. While they measured success by appearances and spending, I'd been building something substantial in the shadows. While they judged success by how things looked and how much was spent, I was secretly building something of real value. Every month, I watched my investment accounts grow. Each month, I saw my investments increase. Every year, I increased my contributions. I added more money to my accounts every year. Every thrift store find represented money that could go toward my future instead of fleeting fashion. Each item I bought from a thrift store was money I could put toward my future instead of on temporary trends. But explaining this to them felt impossible. But trying to explain this to them felt like an impossible task. How could I tell them that their thrift store girl had been making smarter financial decisions than any of them? How could I reveal to them that their so-called thrift store girl had been making more sensible financial choices than they ever had? How could I explain that I'd rather wear a $10 vintage dress and invest the difference than spend $300 on something that would be out of style next season? How could I explain that I'd rather wear a cheap vintage dress and invest the savings than spend a few $100s on something that would soon be out of fashion? Victoria had always been the family favorite, the one who looked the part of success even when the reality was shakier. Victoria had always been the family's darling, the one who appeared successful even when her finances were unstable. She drove a leased BMW she could barely afford, lived in a condo with mortgage payments that stretched her budget thin, and maintained her lifestyle through a combination of credit cards and our parents' occasional bailouts. She drove an expensive leased BMW she could hardly pay for, lived in a condo with mortgage payments that were a financial strain, and kept up her lifestyle by using credit cards and getting help from our parents from time to time. Meanwhile, I drove a reliable Honda I'd bought with cash, lived below my means, and watched my net worth climb steadily year after year. On the other hand, I drove a dependable Honda I had bought outright, lived within my means, and watched my wealth grow steadily over the years. The secret felt heavier some days than others, but I'd learned to carry it quietly. Some days, the secret felt heavier than others, but I had learned to keep it to myself. The Easter brunch proceeded exactly as I'd expected. The Easter meal went exactly as I had predicted. Jessica Henderson arrived with her husband and 2 perfectly dressed children, and within minutes, Victoria had positioned herself as the center of attention, regaling everyone with stories about her latest real estate deals. Jessica Henderson arrived with her husband and their 2 immaculately dressed children, and almost immediately, Victoria made herself the focus of the conversation, entertaining everyone with tales of her recent real estate transactions. "Leah works in finance," my mother explained to Jessica when the conversation inevitably turned to careers. My mother explained to Jessica, "Leah works in finance," when the discussion predictably shifted to jobs. The way she said it made it sound apologetic, as if my job was something to be excused rather than explained. The way she said it sounded like an apology, as if my profession was something to be sorry for, not proud of. "Oh, how nice," Jessica replied politely. "Oh, that's lovely," Jessica responded with courtesy. But I could see her eyes glance over my outfit with the same skeptical expression I'd grown accustomed to from Victoria's friends. But I could see her eyes quickly scan my outfit with the same skeptical look I was used to seeing from Victoria's friends. "What kind of finance? What area of finance do you work in?" "Investment analysis," I said simply, taking a sip of my mimosa. I replied, "Investment analysis," while taking a sip of my drink. I'd learned that the less detail I offered, the sooner the conversation would move on to more interesting topics, namely Victoria's success stories. I had learned that by providing minimal details, the conversation would quickly shift to more exciting subjects, like Victoria's accomplishments. "She's being modest," my father interjected, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what my job actually entailed. My father chimed in, "She's just being humble," though his voice suggested he didn't fully grasp what my job involved. "She does something with numbers and computers. She works with numbers and computers. Very technical. It's a very technical job." Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and familiar. Victoria let out a sharp, familiar laugh. "Leah's always been good with numbers. Leah has always been great with math. Remember how she used to balance her checkbook every week in college? Such a little accountant. Remember how she used to balance her checkbook weekly in college? Such a little accountant. The diminutive stung more than it should have. Being called a little accountant felt more hurtful than it should have. I watched as Victoria launched into another story about $1 million listing she'd almost closed, and I found myself retreating inward the way I always did during these family gatherings. As Victoria began another story about $1 million house she almost sold, I found myself withdrawing into myself, a habit I always fell into at these family get-togethers. I loved them, but being around them felt like trying to breathe underwater sometimes. I cared for them, but sometimes, being with them felt as difficult as trying to breathe when you're underwater. After brunch, while the adults lingered over coffee and the Henderson children played in the backyard, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Following brunch, as the grown-ups drank coffee and the Henderson children played outside, I excused myself to go to the restroom. I'd left my purse on the hall table, and when I returned, I found Victoria rifling through it with a casual entitlement that had always characterized her relationship with my belongings. I had left my purse on a table in the hallway, and when I came back, I saw Victoria going through it with the same casual arrogance she'd always shown toward my possessions. "Victoria, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Victoria, what's going on?" I asked, my voice coming out harsher than I'd planned. She looked up, not even having the grace to appear embarrassed. She looked up without even pretending to be embarrassed. "I was looking for gum. I was just searching for some gum." "You always have gum. You've always got gum." Her hand emerged from my purse, holding something that made my stomach drop. She pulled something from my purse that made my stomach sink. A quarterly statement from my investment account that I'd forgotten to take out after my last meeting with my financial advisor. It was a quarterly statement from my investment account that I had forgotten to remove after my recent meeting with my financial advisor. Her eyes scanned the document, and I watched her expression change from casual annoyance to confusion to something like shock. Her eyes read the document, and I saw her face shift from slight annoyance to confusion to a state of disbelief. The number at the bottom of the page was impossible to miss. The figure at the bottom of the page was impossible to overlook. $9,247,384.20. $9,247,384.20. "What the hell is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She barely whispered, "What the heck is this?" I reached for the paper, but she pulled it back, studying it more carefully. I reached for the document, but she pulled it away to examine it more closely. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Suddenly, the room felt cramped and too hot. This wasn't how I'd planned for them to find out. This was not the way I had wanted them to discover the truth. I'd imagined it happening gradually, maybe years from now, when I was ready to make some big purchase they couldn't ignore. I had imagined it unfolding slowly, perhaps years from now, when I was ready to make a big purchase they couldn't ignore. "Leah," Victoria said, her voice strange and hollow. "Leah," Victoria said, her voice sounding strange and empty. "Is this real? Is this for real?" The question hung between us like a loaded weapon, and I knew that everything was about to change. The question hung in the air like a loaded gun, and I realized that everything was about to be different. "Is this real?" Victoria repeated, her voice rising with each word. Victoria's voice got louder as she repeated, "Is this real?" She held the investment statement like it was evidence of a crime, her perfectly manicured hands trembling slightly. She held the investment statement as if it were a piece of evidence, her manicured hands shaking slightly. I took a deep breath, realizing there was no way to put this revelation back in the box. I took a deep breath, knowing I couldn't undo this reveal. "Yes, it's real. Yes, it is. $9 million. $9 million. Her voice cracked on the number. Her voice broke as she said the number. "You have $9 million. You have $9 million. The hallway suddenly felt like a stage, and I could hear the distant laughter from the dining room where our parents and the Hendersons were still enjoying their coffee. The hallway suddenly felt like a stage, And I could still hear the faint laughter from the dining room, where our parents and the Hendersons were drinking their coffee. Victoria stared at me as if I'd sprouted a second head, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Victoria stared at me as if I had grown a second head, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. How? She finally managed. How? She finally managed to say. How is this possible? How can this be? You shop at Goodwill. You go to Goodwill. You drive that ancient Honda. You drive that old Honda. You live in that tiny apartment. You live in that small apartment. Those choices are exactly how this is possible, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice level. I said calmly, those choices are precisely what made this possible. Every dollar I didn't spend on designer clothes or fancy restaurants went into investments. Every dollar I saved by not buying designer clothes or eating at expensive restaurants was put into investments. Every thrift store find meant more money for my portfolio. Each thrift store find added more money to my investment portfolio. Victoria's face cycled through a series of expressions. Victoria's face went through several different expressions. Shock, confusion, and then something darker. First, she looked shocked, then confused, and finally, something more sinister. You've been lying to us all this time. You've been deceiving us this whole time. You've been pretending to be poor while you're secretly a millionaire. You've been acting like you have no money when you're actually a millionaire. I never pretended to be poor, I corrected. I corrected her. I never claimed to be poor. I just chose to live differently than you do. I simply chose a different way of living than you do. Differently. Differently. Victoria's voice was getting louder now, and I could hear the conversation in the dining room beginning to quiet. Victoria's voice was getting louder, and I could hear the conversation in the dining room start to die down. You let us feel sorry for you. You let us pity you. You let Mom and Dad worry about you. You let Mom and Dad fret over you. You let me pay for dinner last month because I thought you couldn't afford it. You even let me pay for dinner last month because I assumed you couldn't. That stung because it was partially true. That hurt because it was partly true. I had let them assume things about my financial situation, and there had been moments when their pity had been easier to accept than explaining my choices. I had allowed them to make assumptions about my finances, and sometimes it was easier to accept their pity than to explain my choices. But the alternative, revealing my wealth to people who would immediately expect me to fund their lifestyle upgrades, had seemed worse. But the thought of telling people about my wealth, only for them to immediately expect me to pay for their improved lifestyles, seemed much worse. Victoria, what's going on out there? Victoria, what's all the commotion out there? My mother's voice drifted from the dining room, followed by the sound of chairs scraping against hardwood. My mother's voice floated from the dining room, followed by the scraping sound of chairs on the floor. Nothing, Mom, I called back. Nothing, Mom, I called back. But Victoria had already turned toward the dining room, the statement still clutched in her hand. But Victoria had already turned toward the dining room, still holding the statement in her hand. Actually, there's something everyone needs to see, Victoria announced, her voice carrying that theatrical quality she used when she wanted maximum impact. Victoria, using her typical dramatic flair, announced, actually, there's something everyone should see. I followed her back into the dining room, my heart pounding. My heart pounding, I followed her into the dining room. Our parents looked up expectantly while Jessica and her husband exchanged curious glances. Our parents looked up in anticipation, while Jessica and her husband exchanged curious looks. The Henderson children continued playing outside, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. The Henderson kids continued their game outside, completely unaware of the drama happening indoors. Leah has been keeping a secret from us, Victoria said, placing the investment statement on the table like she was laying down a winning poker hand. Leah has been hiding something from us, Victoria said, placing the investment statement on the table as if it were a winning hand of poker. A $9 million secret. A secret worth $9 million. The silence that followed was deafening. The silence that followed was so loud it was almost unbearable. My mother reached for the paper with shaking hands while my father leaned over her shoulder to read. My mother reached for the document with trembling hands as my father leaned in over her shoulder to read it. Jessica and her husband looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Jessica and her husband looked uneasy, clearly wanting to be somewhere else. "Leah," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. "Leah," my mother whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. Is this yours? Is this really yours?" "Yes," I said, my throat tight. "Yes," I said, my throat tightening. "It's mine." "It is." My father's face went through the same progression Victoria's had. My father's face showed the same sequence of emotions that Victoria's had. Shock, confusion, and then something I couldn't quite identify. First shock, then confusion, and then an emotion I couldn't quite place. "How long have you had this kind of money? How long have you had this much money?" "It's been building for years," I admitted. "It's been growing for years," I confessed. "I started investing right after college. I began investing right after I finished college. Small amounts at first, but it grew. I started with small amounts, but it grew over time. Years." Victoria's voice was sharp with accusation. "Years." Victoria's voice was sharp with a hint of blame. "You've been sitting on this fortune for years while the rest of us struggled. You've been sitting on this fortune for years while the rest of us were having a hard time. You haven't been struggling. You weren't struggling." I shot back, finally finding my voice. I retorted, finally able to speak up. "You've been spending beyond your means and expecting our parents to bail you out when you overspend. You've been living beyond your financial limits and counting on our parents to rescue you when you've gone too far." The truth hit the room like a physical blow. The truth landed in the room with the force of a punch. Everyone knew about Victoria's financial habits, but no one had ever said it out loud. Everyone was aware of Victoria's financial habits, but no one had ever said it out loud. "That's not the point," Victoria snapped, her face flushing red. "That's not the issue," Victoria snapped, her face turning red. "The point is that you've been hoarding money while your family needed help. The issue is that you've been saving a bunch of money while your family was in need. When did anyone ask me for help?" I countered. "When did anyone ask me for assistance?" I asked in return. "When did any of you ever treat me like someone who might have something valuable to offer? When did any of you ever treat me like I was someone who could provide something of value?" My mother looked stricken. My mother looked deeply hurt. "Sweetheart, we had no idea. Honey, we had no clue. If we'd known you had this kind of money, you would have what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "If we had known you had this much money, you would have what?" I asked, truly wanting to know. "Treated me differently, respected my choices, or would you have just expected me to start paying for everyone's expenses? Would you have treated me with more respect and valued my choices, or would you have simply expected me to start paying for everyone's bills?" Jessica Henderson cleared her throat awkwardly. Jessica Henderson coughed to clear her throat, a little uncomfortably. "Maybe we should go," she said to her husband, who was already standing up from the table. "Maybe we should leave," she said to her husband, who was already getting up from the table. "No, stay," Victoria said quickly. "No, please stay," Victoria said quickly. "This is important. This is a big deal. Leah needs to understand what family means. Leah has to understand what it means to be family." I watched as Victoria positioned herself as the moral authority in the room, the same way she'd done our entire lives. I watched as Victoria made herself the one in charge of morality in the room, something she had been doing our whole lives. She had a gift for making her desires sound like righteous causes. She had a knack for making what she wanted sound like a just cause. And I could see her wheels turning as she figured out how to spin this situation to her advantage. And I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to manipulate the situation in her favor. Think about everything Mom and Dad have done for us. Think about all the things Mom and Dad have done for us. Victoria continued, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she used with difficult clients. Victoria's voice became persuasive, the same tone she used with tough clients. They paid for our education, supported us when we needed it, and they're still helping both of us in different ways. They paid for our schooling, supported us when we needed it, and they are still helping both of us in different ways. Don't you think it's time to give back? Don't you think it's time to repay them? I do give back, I said. I am giving back, I replied. I've been contributing to their retirement fund for the past 3 years. I've been adding to their retirement savings for the last 3 years. That revelation stopped Victoria mid-sentence. That reveal made Victoria stop talking. My parents looked at each other in confusion. My parents looked at each other confused. What retirement fund? My father asked. What retirement fund? My father asked. The one I set up for you. I explained. The one I created for you, I explained. $500 a month automatically deposited. I automatically deposit $500 a month. I thought you'd noticed. I thought you would have noticed. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My mother's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Those deposits. Those deposits. We thought they were from the pension adjustment. We thought they were from a change in our pension. No, I said quietly. No, I said softly. They were from me. They were from me. Victoria's face darkened. Victoria's face turned grim. So, you have been helping them financially, but you kept it secret. So you've been helping them with money, but you kept it a secret. That makes it even worse. That just makes things even worse. You could have been doing so much more. You could have been doing a lot more. More like what? I asked, though I was beginning to understand where this was heading. Like what? I asked, even though I was starting to see where this was going. Like paying off their mortgage, Victoria said, gaining momentum. Like paying off their home loan, Victoria said, her voice becoming more insistent. Like helping me get out of debt so I can really focus on building my business. Like helping me get rid of my debt so I can truly focus on my business. Like giving our family the security we've never had. Like giving our family the security we've never had. There it was, the real Victoria. The one who saw my money as a solution to all her problems. There it was, the true Victoria, the one who saw my wealth as the answer to all of her problems. I looked around the table at the faces staring back at me, my parents confused and hopeful, Victoria calculating and demanding, the Hendersons increasingly uncomfortable. I looked around the table at the faces staring back at me. My parents looked confused and hopeful, Victoria looked calculating and demanding, and the Hendersons were clearly feeling more and more uncomfortable. You want me to pay off everyone's debts and mortgages, I said slowly. So you want me to pay off everyone's debts and mortgages, I said slowly. You want me to fund your lifestyle upgrades. You want me to pay for your more expensive lifestyle. I want you to do the right thing. I want you to do what's right. Victoria shot back. Victoria quickly replied. I want you to remember that family comes first. I want you to remember that your family should be your top priority. We could all start fresh, Leah. We can all have a new beginning, Leah. We could all be secure. We can all feel secure. Secure, I repeated, tasting the word. Secure, I repeated, as if tasting the word on my tongue. You mean dependent. You mean dependent on me? Don't twist this around, Victoria said. Victoria said, don't try to change what this is about. But I could see the desperation creeping into her eyes. But I could see the desperation in her eyes. You know this is what Mom and Dad would want. You know this is what Mom and Dad would want. They've worried about money their whole lives. They have always been anxious about money. You could fix that. You could solve that for them. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. My mother reached across the table and held my hand. We never asked for this, Leah. We never asked you for any of this, Leah. We're proud of what you've accomplished, but Victoria has a point about family helping family. We're proud of your achievements, but Victoria is right about family helping each other. The pressure in the room was suffocating. The pressure in the room felt overwhelming. I could feel their expectations pressing down on me like a physical weight. I felt the weight of their expectations bearing down on me. And I realized this was exactly why I'd kept my wealth secret for so long. And I realized that this was precisely why I had kept my financial status a secret for so long. Let me get this straight, I said, pulling my hand away from my mother's gentle grip. Let me be clear, I said, gently pulling my hand away from my mother. For 32 years, you've treated me like the family disappointment. For 32 years, you have treated me as the family's letdown. You've mocked my clothes, dismissed my choices, and made me feel like I was never quite good enough. You've made fun of my clothes, ignored my decisions, and made me feel like I was never good enough. And now that you've discovered I'm worth $9 million, suddenly I'm supposed to solve everyone's problems. And now that you've found out I have $9 million, all of a sudden you expect me to fix everyone's problems. That's not fair, my father protested, but his voice lacked conviction. That's not fair, my father said, but his voice wasn't very convincing. Isn't it? Is it not? I stood up from the table, feeling something shift inside me. I got up from the table, feeling a change happening within me. Victoria, you called me Thrift Store Girl 20 minutes ago. Victoria, just 20 minutes ago you called me a Thrift Store Girl. You laughed about my clothes in front of your friends. You made fun of my clothes in front of your friends. You've spent years treating me like I was too pathetic to take seriously. For years, you've treated me like I was too pathetic to be taken seriously. I was just teasing, Victoria said, but her voice was defensive now. I was just kidding, Victoria said, but her voice now sounded defensive. I didn't mean anything by it. I didn't mean anything by it. You meant exactly what you said, I replied. You meant exactly what you said, I answered. You thought I was less than you because I didn't spend money the way you do. You thought I was inferior to you because I didn't spend my money in the same way you do. You assumed I was poor and unsuccessful because I didn't perform wealth the way you think I should. You assumed I was poor and unsuccessful because I didn't display my wealth in the way you think I should have. Jessica Henderson stood up abruptly. Jessica Henderson got up suddenly. We really should go, she said to her husband. She said to her husband, we really need to leave. This feels like a private family matter. This seems like a private family issue. Please don't leave because of this, my mother said. My mother said, please don't go because of this. But she was already gathering her purse. But she was already grabbing her purse. It's fine, Jessica said diplomatically. It's fine, Jessica said tactfully. Thank you for brunch. Thanks for the meal. It was, illuminating. It was, enlightening. After the Hendersons left, the tension in the room became even more concentrated. Once the Hendersons were gone, the tension in the room grew even more intense. Victoria paced behind her chair like a caged animal while my parents sat in stunned silence. Victoria paced behind her chair like an animal in a cage, while my parents sat in a shocked silence. None of that changes the fact that we're family, Victoria said finally. None of that changes the fact that we're related, Victoria finally said. We stick together. We stand by each other. We help each other. We assist one another. That's what families do. That's what family is all about. Is it? I asked. Is it? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like families mock each other for being different, assume the worst about each other's choices, and then demand financial support when it turns out those different choices were actually smart ones. Because, in my view, it looks like families make fun of each other for being different, assume the worst about their decisions, and then ask for financial help when it turns out those different choices were actually good ones. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My mother's eyes welled up with tears. Leah, please. Leah, please. We love you. We love you. We've always loved you. We have always loved you. I know you love me, I said, and I meant it. I know you love me, I said, and I truly meant it. But you've never respected me. But you have never respected me. You've never valued my judgment or my choices. You have never valued my judgment or my decisions. You've treated me like a charity case who needed your pity, not an equal member of this family. You've treated me like someone who needs your pity, not as a respected member of this family. So what are you saying? Victoria demanded. So what are you trying to say? Victoria demanded. You're going to punish us for hurting your feelings. Are you going to punish us just because you're hurt? You're going to keep all that money to yourself out of spite? Are you going to keep all that money just to be spiteful? I'm saying that the same qualities that made you look down on me are the exact qualities that built this wealth, I replied. I'm saying that the very same qualities you looked down on me for are the same ones that created this wealth. The careful spending, the second-hand shopping, the quiet saving. The cautious spending, the second-hand shopping, and the quiet saving. You mocked all of it. You made fun of all of it. You don't get to benefit from choices you spent years criticizing. You don't get to benefit from the choices you spent years making fun of. Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. Victoria's composure finally broke. This is ridiculous. This is absurd. You're being selfish and petty. You're acting selfishly and immaturely. That money could change all of our lives. That money could change all of our lives. It already changed mine, I said. It already changed mine, I said. It gave me the freedom to stop caring what you think about my clothes or my apartment or my car. It gave me the freedom to no longer care what you think about my clothes, my apartment, or my car. It gave me the security to be myself instead of trying to meet your expectations. It gave me the security to be myself rather than trying to live up to your expectations. So that's it. So that's all. Victoria's voice was rising to a shout now. Victoria's voice was now becoming a shout. You're going to hoard $9 million while your parents struggle to pay their bills. You're going to keep $9 million to yourself while your parents can barely pay their bills. My parents aren't struggling, I said calmly. My parents aren't struggling, I said calmly. They haven't struggled for 3 years thanks to the money I've been quietly sending them. They haven't had to worry for 3 years because of the money I've been discreetly giving them. Money you all assumed came from somewhere else because you never imagined I could be the one providing it. Money you all thought came from somewhere else because you never once considered that I would be the one giving it to them. The silence that followed was different from the earlier shock. The silence that followed was different from the previous shock. This was the silence of people realizing that everything they thought they knew was wrong. This was the silence of people realizing that everything they thought they knew was incorrect. I walked to the front door feeling strangely calm for the first time all day. For the first time all day, I walked to the front door feeling a strange sense of calm. Behind me, I could hear Victoria's voice rising in pitch as she continued her arguments. Behind me, I could hear Victoria's voice getting higher as she continued to argue. But the words had lost their power to hurt me. But her words no longer had the power to harm me. I'd spent so many years absorbing their criticism, letting their disappointment shape how I saw myself that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I had spent so many years taking in their criticism and letting their disappointment define my self-perception that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand tall. "Where are you going?" my mother called after me. My mother called after me. "Where are you going?" I turned back to face them one last time. I turned around to face them one last time. Victoria stood in the dining room doorway, her face flushed with anger and desperation. Victoria stood in the dining room doorway, her face red with anger and desperation. My parents flanked her, looking older and more confused than I'd ever seen them. My parents stood on either side of her, looking older and more confused than I had ever seen them. "I'm leaving," I said simply. "I'm leaving," I said plainly. "And I want you all to think about something. And I want all of you to consider something. You spent this entire morning making jokes about my clothes and my lifestyle. You spent the whole morning joking about my clothes and my lifestyle. You introduced me to your friends like I was someone to be pitied. You introduced me to your friends as if I were someone to be felt sorry for. You've been doing that for years, and I let you because I thought family meant accepting how people treated you. You've done that for years, and I let you because I thought that being a family meant you just had to accept how people treated you. Victoria opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up a hand to stop her. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. But here's what you didn't understand, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. But here's what you didn't get, I continued, my voice getting stronger with every word. While you were buying designer handbags and leasing expensive cars, I was building something real. While you were buying designer purses and leasing costly cars, I was creating something of true value. While you were worried about appearances, I was creating actual security. While you were concerned with appearances, I was building real security. And now that you know what I've accomplished, you want to claim it as family property. And now that you know what I've achieved, you want to claim it as something that belongs to the family. It doesn't have to be like this, my father said quietly. My father said softly. It didn't have to turn out this way. You're right. I agreed. You're right, I agreed. It didn't have to be like this. It didn't have to be this way. You could have respected my choices. You could have shown respect for my choices. You could have treated me like an equal instead of a disappointment. You could have treated me like a peer instead of a letdown. You could have valued substance over style, but you chose differently. You could have valued substance over style, but you made a different choice. Victoria stepped forward, her voice desperate now. Victoria moved forward, her voice now filled with desperation. Leah, please. Leah, please. We can fix this. We can make things right. We can do better. We can do better. Just give us a chance to prove it. Just give us a chance to prove it. With $9 million, I asked. With $9 million. I asked. That's not how trust works, Victoria. That's not how trust is built, Victoria. That's not how respect works. That's not how you earn respect. You don't get to mock someone for being different and then demand to share in the success that came from those differences. You don't get to make fun of someone for being different and then expect to share in the success that resulted from those differences. I reached for the door handle, but Victoria's voice stopped me one more time. I grabbed the doorknob, but Victoria's voice stopped me again. You're making a huge mistake, she said. She said, you're making a huge mistake. Her tone shifting from pleading to threatening. Her tone changing from pleading to threatening. Family is all you have, Leah. Family is the only thing you have, Leah. You think your money makes you better than us, but it doesn't. You believe your money makes you better than us, but it doesn't. Money doesn't buy you love or loyalty. Money can't buy you love or loyalty. I turned back slowly, meeting her eyes with a clarity I'd never felt before. I slowly turned back and met her gaze with a clarity I had never felt before. You're absolutely right, I said. You are completely right, I said. Money doesn't buy love or loyalty, which is exactly why I'm not going to try to buy yours with $9 million. Money doesn't buy love or loyalty, which is precisely why I am not going to try to buy yours with $9 million. The words hit her like a physical blow. My words struck her like a physical blow. For the first time in our entire relationship, Victoria had no comeback, no clever response, no way to turn the situation to her advantage. For the first time in our lives, Victoria had no retort, no clever comeback, and no way to turn the situation to her benefit. You mocked the girl who made this happen, I said, my voice steady and calm. You made fun of the person who made this happen, I said, my voice steady and calm. You laughed at her clothes, dismissed her choices, and treated her like she was too pathetic to take seriously. You laughed at her clothes, ignored her decisions, and treated her like she was too pathetic to be taken seriously. You don't get to claim her success now that it's convenient for you. You don't get to claim her success now that it suits you. My mother took a step forward. My mother stepped forward. Leah, sweetheart, we never meant to make you feel. Leah, honey, we never intended to make you feel. I know you didn't mean to, I said gently. I know you didn't mean to, I said gently. But intentions don't erase impact. But good intentions don't undo the harm they caused. And the impact of 32 years of being treated like the family failure doesn't disappear because you've suddenly discovered I'm actually the family success. And the effect of being treated like the family's disappointment for 32 years doesn't just go away because you've suddenly found out I am actually the family's success story. I looked at each of them one more time. I looked at each of them one more time. My parents with their confused hurt. My parents who looked hurt and confused. Victoria with her barely contained rage. Victoria who could barely contain her anger. These people had shaped my childhood, influenced my choices, and remained at the center of my world even when their love came wrapped in criticism. These people had shaped my younger years, influenced my decisions, and were still at the center of my life even though their love came with a lot of criticism. I hope someday you understand, I said. I hope you understand someday, I said. I hope someday you realize that the person you couldn't respect was exactly the person you needed her to be. I hope that one day you will see that the person you couldn't respect was the exact person you needed her to be. With that, I walked out the door and closed it firmly behind me. With that, I walked out the door and shut it firmly behind me. The sound echoing through the quiet Scottsdale afternoon like a final punctuation mark on the conversation that had changed everything. The sound echoed through the peaceful Scottsdale afternoon. A final, definitive punctuation mark on the conversation that had altered everything. Victoria's attempts to salvage the situation became increasingly desperate in the weeks that followed. In the weeks that followed, Victoria's efforts to fix the situation became more and more desperate. She tried calling me dozens of times, leaving voicemails that shifted from angry demands to tearful apologies to calculated guilt trips. She called me countless times, leaving voicemails that went from angry demands to tearful apologies to manipulative guilt trips. When I didn't respond, she enlisted our parents as intermediaries, then mutual friends, then anyone who might have influence with me. When I didn't answer, she used our parents to get to me, then mutual friends, and then anyone else who might have some sway over me. Eventually, in a move that surprised no one who truly knew her, she hired a lawyer to explore whether she had any legal claim to my money as family. Finally, in a move that no one who knew her was surprised by, she hired a lawyer to see if she had any legal right to my money because we were family. The consultation lasted exactly 20 minutes before the attorney explained that blood relation doesn't create financial obligation, and Victoria was left with both a hefty legal bill and the humiliation of having her greed officially documented. The meeting lasted a mere 20 minutes before the lawyer informed her that being related by blood does not create a financial obligation, leaving Victoria with a large legal bill and the embarrassment of having her greed formally recorded. Our parents, meanwhile, struggled with the revelation that their successful daughter was drowning in debt while their disappointing daughter had quietly become a millionaire. Meanwhile, our parents were having a hard time accepting the fact that their successful daughter was struggling with debt while their disappointing daughter had secretly become a millionaire. The cognitive dissonance proved too much for their carefully constructed family narrative, and they found themselves increasingly isolated as friends and neighbors learned about Victoria's lawsuit attempt and their role in the Easter confrontation. The mental conflict was too much for their carefully crafted family story, and they became more and more isolated as friends and neighbors found out about Victoria's lawsuit and their part in the Easter confrontation. 6 months later, I sat in my new reading nook in Denver, Colorado, watching the morning light filter through my apartment windows. 6 months later, I was in my new home in Denver, Colorado, sitting in my new reading nook and watching the morning light come through my apartment windows. I'd moved here partly for the fresh start and partly to be closer to the non-profit I'd started, a financial literacy program for young women from working-class backgrounds. I had moved here partly for a fresh start and partly to be closer to the non-profit I had founded, which was a program that taught financial literacy to young women from low-income families. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was teaching them the same principles my family had mocked me for following. I found it ironic that I was teaching them the same principles my family had made fun of me for. Spend less than you earn, invest the difference, and don't let other people's opinions about your choices determine your worth. Live on less than you make, invest the rest, and don't let others' opinions about your choices determine your value. As I reviewed applications for our next round of mentorship scholarships, I couldn't help but smile at how perfectly my revenge had unfolded. As I looked over applications for our next group of mentorship scholarships, I couldn't help but smile at how perfectly my revenge had played out. Not through any elaborate scheme or calculated cruelty, but simply by refusing to let their judgment define my value. My revenge wasn't through some complex plan or deliberate act of cruelty, but simply by refusing to let their judgment determine my self-worth. Sometimes the best revenge is living well enough to walk away from people who never deserved your loyalty in the first place. Sometimes the best way to get back at someone is to live so well that you can simply walk away from people who never deserved your loyalty to begin with.